We are here at the Martin Perry home, April 5th, 2025, to interview Sherry Carmichael, member and volunteer of the Powell-Liberty Historical Society. Sherry, can you just tell us a little bit about how long have you lived in Powell?
I have lived in Powell basically all of my years. However, the important thing, I think, is that I am a sixth generation of my family to live in Powell, which gives me very deep roots here.
And who were your parents?
My father was Gerald Harris, and he was from Lancaster. But my mother was Marjorie Snoffer Harris, and later Bennett. And she had a lot to do with the Historical Society.
And when you say Lancaster, is that Lancaster, Ohio?
Correct.
Okay. When did they come to, well, your mother, we know, was already here, but when did your dad come to Powell?
Well, my mother and father met at the Army Depot during war. My dad had he was paralyzed on his side from an early polio and was rejected from serving. And so he drove a truck at the Army Depot, and mother was working there as a secretary. And the story is that he honked at her and she winked at him.
Oh, that's kind of risque back then, too.
You mentioned that your mother and father met at the Army Depot. Where was the Army Depot?
It was in Columbus. I honestly can't tell you the exact address, but it was in Columbus.
And how long did your parents live here?
They lived here most of their life too. When I talk about being a sixth generation here, I can trace back to several early families that came in the early 1800s. There were the Bentons and the Gardners and the Lowrys. So those are the names in my past.
Is there any more that would you like to say about the generation? Because the Lowrys, I mean, they've been here, you know, that's where this is part of this house.
Correct. This where the Martin Perry house is located on farmland that was owned by John Lowry from the mid-1800s, pre-Civil War. And of course, this particular house was occupied by one of his daughters.
Okay.
And perhaps I should say too, since I mentioned the Bartons or the Bentons and the Gardners and the Lowrys, that when I said my mother's name was Snoffer, her father was part of the family who lived on Snoffer Road. And they weren't necessarily important people, probably the only large farming family on the road, but Snoffer Road is named after our family.
Then your mother, then later her name became Bennett.
Correct.
So there's a Bennett Parkway. There's connection there?
There is. The city of Powell bought 10 acres from the Bennett farm in order to put the bypass through. So that's why it's called Bennett Parkway. I should tell you too that when I was born, my parents were living on Forsyth Street in Columbus. But very shortly after that, because when the war was over, the actual veterans came back and took the jobs, my father was out of a job and could not seem to find anything here. So we actually moved to Florida for 2 years in order to see if Daddy could find work there. My grandparents had a winter home there, and so we lived with them in Florida. I had my second birthday there, but then because he had trouble finding work there too, he did come back and actually found work at the Jeffrey Manufacturing Company, which is in Columbus, or was in Columbus. They made machinery for coal, the coal business. And many, many, many people right here in this town of Powell worked for the Jeffrey Manufacturing Company.
Now, could you, now how did he, what kind of transportation did he have to get to Jeffrey's place once you were back settled here in Powell? Did you use a train or?
No, he had a car.
Okay.
He had a car. One
car? Okay.
One car.
Well, should we ask Sherry about the school here? And when you started school, elementary school, I don't think there was a kindergarten, or was there in those days?
When I started school, it was the 1952-53 year for first grade, because there was no kindergarten. And it happened to be the last year that the school was used as a high school. So my first grade, I was also here with the high schoolers. But the 1953-54 year was the first year of Olentangy High School. So for 1 year, there were high school students at the school, and then for my second year, they were all at Olentangy, the high schoolers.
I'm trying to imagine it's the school on the hill, right?
Correct, the monument on the
And
hill.
you had 12 classes there. Were there classes that were combined, or were there 12? Yeah,
Correct.
12 separate.
Yes,
I don't remember.
correct.
12
But
separate rooms.
when you have to understand that when the war was over and the men came home, the population went up.
Yeah.
And so even though there had been smaller classes before 46, by the year I was born in 46, the population boomed.
Yeah, I think they call us baby boomers.
Yeah, but we are the baby. I am a baby boomer.
Okay, then after the did you have a favorite teacher or anything in elementary?
I loved school. I really did. But I did have a favorite. And it was my 5th grade teacher, and her name was Mrs. Rice. Tiny little lady, but had such wonderful ideas. Even though money was tight, she figured out ways for us to earn money in our own class to start our own library. We held bake sales at the school, and we raised money, and then she took us to a downtown Columbus bookstore where we could pick out our own books for the library.
Oh, wow. So they put you on a bus and took you right downtown?
They did, and she just was very inventive and made school fun, and we all loved her. And when I said the population blossomed or mushroomed, we had as many as 32 kids in our class.
Oh, that's a big class.
It's a big class, especially today.
Now, did you have any school best friend that you got in trouble with or anything like that during elementary? Or
Got in trouble with?
well, something mischievous?
I did get marked down in what was the term? Deportment or something like that, because I talked a lot. we did have fun. We did have fun. Yes, in the town with that big class, we were all good friends and we had a lot of fun. I don't know that we ever did anything really bad, but we had fun.
Now, did you walk to school?
I did. Uphill and downhill in the
Snow.
snow and the rain. I was just 4 houses east of the schoolhouse, so I did walk. I never rode a bus until I went to high school at Olentangy.
Did they have bus service to the school here in Powell at the time you were going to school?
Yes, they did, but for those of us who were close enough to walk, we walked. And like I said, it wasn't until I was in high school that I rode a bus over to Olentangy.
During the time you were going to school, did they have a middle school or a junior high?
Oh, no.
So you would.
No.
So how far did you go before you went into the high school?
Okay. By the time I graduated from 8th grade, that's when we went over to the high school. So at the time that I was in school, Powell was no longer a high school. It just had 8 grades. Now later, there was a junior high built for the 7th and 8th graders, I believe, and then even later a middle school. And that was all in the Olentangy campus area.
Right, on Shanahan.
On Shanahan, because I am a graduate of the original, the Olentangy High School.
Okay, so that is the next question was the high school that you went to is Olentangy.
Correct.
And back then, I mean, how large was your graduation class?
Oh, I'm glad you asked that because I graduated in 1964 and we were the largest to date to graduate, and we had 99 students.
Wow, that was more than I had. What kind of functions did you do at high school? Were you in any organizations? Were you a cheerleader or a...
I had been a cheerleader at Powell for the 7th and 8th grade, but my mother would not allow me to go out when I went to high school because she wanted me to study. And so that allowed me to go to the games and sit with the boys.
Well, I was... And speaking of boys, did you meet anybody that fancied your eye when you were in high school?
Yes, I did. I was a freshman and he was a senior, and Stan Carmichael became my husband, no less. So yes, we met in high school. Yeah. And you had asked me if I did was in any organizations. I was in vocal, and I sang in the choirs and in a octet, and I also was wanting to be a school teacher, a kindergarten teacher. So I was in that organization, Teachers of America,
Yes.
Young Teachers of America, something like that. I was also in Y-Teens, and let's see, I guess that would probably covered it, but went to all of the games, and I was in track, and I did the early part of gymnastics called tumbling.
Oh, okay. Now, did they have any fun activities at high school for after going to school, like school dances, homecoming dances?
Oh, absolutely.
Did you have bands that come and play, or?
Yeah, we had of course we had the junior or the homecomings, and I was fortunate enough to be the homecoming attendant my freshman year, and then we had all kinds of dances.
Who was your escort for your freshman year?
The attendant was Alan Salser.
I'll be damned.
That when I
Okay.
was a freshman, but that was not my date.
And what about prom? Did they take you? Did the kids back then? Did they leave the high school to have the prom, or did you get to have it at the school?
There was a little bit of each. Mostly, I think, for finances, we had a lot of them at the school, at least the dinner, and then we would go off to the all-night party at some party house, something like that. Yes.
Did you ever go to the Murphy's Barn or anything when they do that for a party, all-night
No.
party or anything like that?
No, we never had it there. I can't remember right now the name. It escapes me. In Delaware, there was a party house that most schools went to.
Well, I'm sure quite a few parents were chaperones that
Oh,
helped
yes.
watch the
Yes.
teenagers.
Yes.
Was your mom and dad involved? or-
No, mother was not involved in that, but she was a sewer, and she made me the most beautiful dresses.
Oh, that's wonderful. I guess the next thing we'd ask you is, well, we did find out your favorite subject. You were wanting to be a teacher,
Right.
but it's kindergarten. Was there another subject that you liked too? History or?
English and history were always the favorites. I hated math, and I still do.
Another thing is, what was some of your favorite things of being a child growing up?
Oh, well, back when I was growing up in the 50s and early 60s, Powell was very much smaller than it is today. And we rode our bikes all over the place. There was traffic, but not like today. We went swimming We would get our work done in the mornings and spend the whole afternoon, sometimes go back in the evening until they closed, at the swimming pool in Shawnee Hills.
Okay.
Absolutely adored that. So biking, swimming. In the winter, we would slide down in the snow. We would slide down the Powell School Hill. Loved to do that. And quite frankly, because I was only 4 houses from the school, it was my year-round playground. I could go over and swing and slide down the sliding board and play there as a kid. But yes, we had, even our dogs, our pets, could follow us up to the town. There wasn't a leash law or anything like that. So it was a very leave it to beaver type of youth and growing up.
Were there any sort of hangouts in town where the kids would congregate?
Well, we had 2 small mom and pop stores, and you could go up to Clara's, or you could go up to the Reeves, red and white, and get a popsicle, ice cream cone, something like that, the ones that were already packaged. But later at Plummer's, the little 5 and dime store, they opened a little ice cream area, and you could go up and get cones there. I always wanted to work there as a teenager, but I never did.
Now, where was Claire's Market where you?
Okay, Clara's was in the Oddfellow Hall building in the lower level, and that is on the corner of South Liberty and West Olentangy. The building remains today.
I remember a little bit about Plumbers as well, and I think you have mentioned it in the past, but when you opened the front door, you were confronted with what?
The penny candy. The penny candy, absolutely. Yes, and we always bought candy on our way home from church. Daddy always gave us extra money, one for the plate in the church and one for the candy at Plummer's. And yeah, that was kind of a hangout. Plus they had soda pop.
Yeah.
And I don't know that you would say that we congregated there, but we frequented those places.
And where was Plummer's?
Oh, yeah, okay. Plummer's is on West Olentangy Street on the north side. It is now, today in 2025, it's Huli Restaurant.
Yeah, that's what I know, yeah.
Yes.
And there was something about, I remember, I think there was a story, something about you took your little brother and he had his money to get candy and he kind of gave you some trouble or something?
He kind of gave me some trouble a lot of times, but yes, on Sunday mornings on the way home from church, he had 5 pennies and he could never decide on the penny candy. And it took forever until Evelyn Anderson would say, Mike, choose your pennies or choose your candy. And of course, if he couldn't, I would have to drag him out of the store kicking and screaming, and that was no fun.
So where was church?
Church was the Powell Methodist Church, also on West Olentangy Street. It was the only church in the town. There had been one earlier, just a couple of houses west of the Martin Perry House, as a Seventh-day Adventist church, but it had not lasted very long and wasn't there when I was alive. So, yeah.
And where the building, where the church at that time is, the building's still here in Powell.
It is. What are you talking about? The Adventist church or
the Methodist church?
Methodist church. Yeah, both of them are here. The Adventist church is now today used as a cigar store. The Methodist church, actually there on West Olentangy Street, is empty at the moment. It's been a couple of different things since being desanctified, as they call it, when a newer Methodist church was built east of town before you get to the river.
I'm going to shift gears slightly to
Sure.
ask you who were some of the most important or significant members of the Powell community you knew over the years?
Yeah, well, and again, because it was a small town, everybody knew everybody. But as far as significant to me, I had neighbors that were so close to me, they could almost be another parent. And that was Jean and Ginny Hess. Also, Bill Mullador. There is a Mullador Drive that enters into Olentangy Ridge across the street from us. The Mulladors lived there in that house, and he was the first marshal. He was a marshal. I don't think he was first. He was a marshal of the town when all we had was a marshal and a deputy. So his granddaughter was one of my best friends, and I was lucky enough to go and spend nights, she and I, in Mr. Mullador's house, and I would call him Mikey. So, even though he was the marshal and like a grandfather, that's how close our community was. Another one would have been Jean Kirkham, and she was my vocal teacher and the choir director at church, and I became a choir member there. And she really was like a second mother to me. Very close we were.
When did you meet Mrs. Perry?
Mrs. Perry was simply always here when I would walk uptown to get a popsicle or whatever. And many times she would be out in her yard tending her flowers. And I would just stop by to say hi, and we would, talk like that. Knew her and all that. Let's see, another person. Well, another fun story is that the little post office, which is now, I think, a dog grooming shop.
It is a dog.
That's where you could hear all the gossip of the town. And you went, and because we were within the limits of the town, we would have to go there to get our mail out of the box. There was mail, a carrier for outside of the area. But at any rate, so I would go up there, and Clarence and Annabelle Doolin would be there sorting by hand the mail. And when my boyfriend, Stan Carmichael, was in the National Guards and away from town, he would write his letters, and I would go there faithfully for a letter. And Clarence, knowing that, would hold the letter when he found it until he had finished with all the rest of the mail, making me late sometimes for my singing lesson. But, that's just how close we were. It was fun. It was fun being here. Yeah, knowing everyone.
Well, here's one that is, Powell of today is certainly not the Powell of your youth. From your perspective, what is the significant or important changes that has been made right now? So here,
Well, I've got to say that probably the town has never looked prettier, nicer, because the businesses who have come in have made the town successful looking and kept it up and all that. But what we have lost in it is that sense of community, I think. And partly that is because as you grow, and the developers come in and you have housing developments, the people within the housing developments may have a unity, but there's not the unity of the entirety of the towns to me anymore. The growth has just scattered us somewhat, taken away that charm. Now, I am happy to see that because the central part of the town is small, people park and walk. And I like that. And it seems to keep the old charm alive a little better. And that's what I'd like to see preserved as far as that's concerned too. But another thing that is different is that at the time that it was a small town and not a city status, the services were often done voluntarily, like the fire department. They just called the farmers in, and they might get $1 a year, but it was volunteer. And because of that, there was none of this rankling over unions and, more pay and higher taxes and that kind of thing that come with larger entities. And so I think we've lost something in that idea of this is my town and I'm going to take care of it, that comes from volunteering.
What are some of the types of businesses that were here when you were growing up as a small town that aren't here anymore? As far as when Powell was small, like a lot of other small towns, it's very self-sufficient. So what are some of the businesses that maybe people wouldn't realize or wouldn't expect? Some of the newer residents wouldn't expect or know that actually were in Powell at one time.
Well, of course, the mom and pop grocery stores have gone by the wayside.
The hardware store?
Yes, I guess that. The hardware store was kind of a big deal, especially because we were more rural and agriculturally, agrarian, is that the word? And so the people came in to the hardware a lot. And we do have one outside of the town now, a little bit. But yeah, you don't have that central one any longer.
And everybody knew each other too.
Well, that's true. Yeah. I mean, the little 5 and dime that we called Plumber's Trading Post that had everything you needed from notebook paper for school to men's work pants to penny candy to soda pop to clocks on the wall, just a little mingling of everything. We don't have anything like that anymore. I guess that might be called a Dollar General today, but we don't have one in Powell. And of course, what we do have now, outlying areas, are stores like Target. Walmart's not very far away, those kind of things. But everything was kind of centralized, like you were mentioning. We did have groceries. We did have the post office. And the post office today is huge, serving so many. It's not that little gossipy one room anymore. So those are some of the changes. But
Your gas stations.
Gas stations. I'm glad you mentioned that. And there was a Sahaya station, and it was started by Gene Kirkham's parents, the Canfields. And there was also, then it was run by Mel and Poodle Morgan. And yes, we all got our, and then there was I think that Tom Caldwell started one on North Liberty. It was more of a mechanics. And earlier there had been one that was a Texaco, I believe, station, which is near the graveyard.
Okay, the first one you mentioned, where was that located?
The Sahaya station was on, it's actually where the local Roots is right now, where their outside seating is. And so it was East Olentangy and South Liberty corner there. Yeah.
And the Texaco station was where?
The Texaco station was in the parking area by the graveyard.
Oh.
And one of the buildings was used when they started the fire station.
Okay, the other thing was, we kind of touched a little bit on this about the positive and negative of the changes, but you want to say a little bit more about the positive and negative about changes that were happening here in Powell?
Well, I guess what I would add to that is that that's the real purpose of our historical society. We can't preserve every building, and not every building should be, but we can preserve the story. And that's what we do here at the Historical Society through pictures and memories. And so that has come out. The Historical Society has sort of come out of all of the developing that's going on.
And plus what you're doing too is doing the walking tours in the summertime to get people new in the area to see what's going on, what used to be.
And why is that important?
I feel that that's important because, well, personally, if I moved somewhere, I'm just nosy enough that I'd like to know the story behind the place that I now call home. And so if there are people today that moved to this area and they're making this place their home, we want to share the history of it, the story of it. I think it just helps them possess the area more, have more of an idea or a feeling that it's their home now. They know more. And I find that when we do these walking tours around town and we point out the reason for these older buildings that might not be fresh and lovely like the new ones, that now they have an understanding of their purpose, and they have a more of a how shall I say it? They just
An appreciation.
an appreciation,
Yeah.
right?
Create an identity even?
Right, an appreciation and an identity. And so when they do that, then there's more of a sense of possession, that this is now home. And I find that sometimes people will say, I went on your walking tour and I had some relatives come and I took them around the town and I showed them what this building was and what this building was. And, like I say, it turns into it's theirs now.
Well, the other one was what makes Powell an attractive place to live today? So what do you, we touched on some of the things of the old buildings turning into businesses and restaurants, and it's becoming a walking town where you could, and they have a park. But is there anything else you think that attracts people to come out here to want to live here in Powell?
Well, many people will say that they came here because of its charm, because it's more, they felt like it was more country than their city dwelling. And it has lovely home developments throughout and all around. There are a lot of things to do in the park, the park system, the biking, the trails. We even have preservation parks within the area that they can go to. It's close, really, to, it would be considered, as it always has, a bedroom community when you consider that we're close to Columbus, close to the airport, those kind of things. There's golf courses. There's so the Columbus Zoo is a big draw in Zambezi Bay. So being located here puts you close to a lot of things that people want today.
Well, the next thing is, your mother was one of the founders of the Powell-Liberty Historical Society. What was the involvement of her getting this started?
It had to do with the development, the mushrooming development that was coming, and the bulldozer. They say that if a tornado comes through and takes down the trees and buildings and so forth, that's a calamity. That's horrible. But when they come down or come to tear those same things down, it's progress. So anyway, so the Historical Society was started out of this booming mushrooming growth that was coming to Powell. It did happen just before city status. The Historical Society was started by these 5 ladies in 1986, and Powell had city status in the year 2000 after the census was taken. So at any rate, it was a knee-jerk reaction to growth. And my mother, Louise Cornish, and the others who started this simply wanted to save the story, like I've said before. Not to necessarily save all the buildings, you can't, but to educate the new people who came on the history of the town, as we've said before, hoping that they'll have more of a feeling of roots themselves.
So did the Martin Perry house simultaneously happen at that time?
Actually, yes. The house was probably the impetus as well as the development, because it was going to be torn down. And it had been empty for about 10 years. And they were saying, we need a historical society. Perhaps we could use this house as our headquarters if we could save it. And so those are some of the reasons for the Historical Society being formed.
Did they buy the house? I mean, how did that happen?
The house belonged to a developing company, the Johns Company. And the Johns actually lived in Powell. So they had more of a reason for helping us, I'd say. And so it was a grassroots effort where a bunch of us, including me, went door to door throughout Liberty Township, basically, saying, would you support the idea of a historical society? Do you think it's a good idea? Would you be willing to be a member or a give for that? And there was very good support for the idea of starting a historical society. And so they went to the developer and said, would you give us the house? Well, they said they would give us the house, but we'd have to move the house. We had no place to move it to, no property or anything. So eventually what happened was they gave us a certain amount of time to raise a certain amount of money to make sure that this was a going concern. And once they saw that we were gaining on that amount and that it looked like we were really going to make it, the goal, they donated the house on this small piece of property and actually gave us the remaining amount of money that we needed to meet the goal.
And how big is this lot? Is this
It's less than an acre.
Less than
I
an
can't
acre.
remember exactly how much. But
And then how did you raise your money? What kind of functions did you get to volunteer?
it was just given out of pocket.
Okay.
We did have fundraisers after the fact.
What was a few of the most rewarding things that you've done with the Powell Historical Society as a volunteer?
As a volunteer, probably the most rewarding is being allowed to be a speaker for the society, whether that is speaking at clubs or speaking in the schools, especially speaking in the schools with the kids, trying to develop in them a love of history and a desire to carry on
Yes.
when we can no longer. So I would say just the involvement in the town, when sometimes there'll be a developer that will come and ask about the history of town because the area they're going to develop, they want to name streets, so they want to know the history of the area. Sometimes they're going to restore a home, and we can provide them with the history of the home and pictures early on. And so those things are rewarding. It's really rewarding.
And do you enjoy doing any of the functions of when you do an event like playing Irene Carpenter?
Well,
That took a lot of research and work to do something like that.
well, I think that because Liberty Township was I should say, inhabited before Delaware County. Liberty Township was Liberty Township or was settled in 1801. First settlers came in 1801. Delaware County became a county in 1808. So the first pioneers that came here, it was truly wilderness. And that story always intrigued me of, especially bringing a family here, what did the wife think? And what did the children think of leaving society and coming to the wilderness? And so that was a labor of love. I truly loved doing the research for the Irina Carpenter Journal video that we did and produced by Alan. I'm still waiting on the invitation from the Oscars, but
Well, it won't be coming from Hollywood.
I might get an invitation from Oscar, the grandson Oscar,
Yes.
sooner than I'll get an Oscar invitation.
I was just going to ask if you're looking and talking to a group of these people, as you described, living in the suburbs that are unaware of Powell-Liberty Historical Society. What would you tell them to generate some interest or appreciation for what you do here?
Well, I would invite them to the Historical Society or I would simply introduce them to the idea of a historical society. And basically what I've said before, don't you want to know about the story behind the place you now call home? And of course, going with that would be, won't you become a member? And we need volunteers to carry this on.
Well, another thing is our events. That, don't you think that helps a lot to bring out the people and that takes a lot of work for us to do that, and we don't charge.
All right.
So we need, it's still need to draw the people in to get the interest.
Right. Well, our monthly meetings are well planned and interesting. And so, yes, I would certainly invite them to the monthly meetings on the third Monday of each month and on the walks and the tours and so forth, because we don't just deal with our own town during those programs. We're wider than that. But we do have very interesting programs. And anybody that has any interest in history would enjoy them. The ones that are specific to Powell, of course, might take precedence in the lives of those who live here. But, we live in a very busy period, and folks with children and moms working, it's hard to do everything you want to do, all the sports activities and so forth. So that is our competition, I guess, for our programs and so forth. But it's upon us to do good advertising and word of mouth
And
writing.
in our website.
The website, powellhistory.org is a wonderful source. And even if you can't make the programs, they are put on monthly that can be viewed later.
Is there anything that you can think of that would be maybe something that people would be surprised to learn about? Maybe just some fun facts, trivia that that again, people that have lived here even for a long time maybe wouldn't be aware of, but find interesting.
Couple things about that. We have a lady, a volunteer in our society, who does a wonderful job in putting out little Facebook trivia and just stories. And that's a wonderful way for people to learn. But among a couple of those that I'm thinking of is, would people understand and know that we had some popular people who actually lived in Powell at different times? One that is well known today is George Clooney, and his father, Dick Clooney, who was also in media and had television programs and so forth, actually lived here in Powell for 2 years. Now, George did not go to school at Powell School. He went to a Catholic school in Worthington while he was here. But he, as a boy, was here in Powell, Ohio. Also, let's see, besides him, well, there was a well-known journalist who wrote for several newspapers in the area, who lived along the Olentangy River Road. Johnny Jones was his name. The Big Bear supermarket, which is no longer in existence, but there was a large farm run by the gentleman who started the Big Bear store. Let's see, what else? Also, an Olympian swimmer, Johnny Weissmiller from the past, actually was at the opening of the Shawnee Hills swimming pool that I frequented it so much in my summers. Of course, he's long gone, but those are kind of interesting things.
And his claim, one of the big claims of fame, where most people would recognize him, he was Tarzan in the Tarzan movies.
He was.
Jungle Theater.
Yeah. Real early on, there was a minstrel that had a resort type home here for a while. Maybe the idea that O'Shaughnessy Dam was built, and the gentleman who lived in this house, the second gentleman actually was an engineer on the O'Shaughnessy Dam. And of course, that was, Irwin Berry. So, he wasn't exactly famous, but he did important work. We had Mr. Dennison of the Dennison Corporation, very intelligent man who lived here. The area of Loch Lomond was his property.
Don Mack was another.
Don Mack was a local TV personality who lived along the Olentangy River, not too far from Johnny Jones. We've had some characters.
So you talk about, we talk about Powell per se, but this is Powell-Liberty, and the township of Liberty. You experienced all kinds of things there as well. It's got two rivers side by, one side and the other. It's another attraction, I think, for people.
You're correct. And unfortunately, because the society's headquarters is here in Powell, we tend to overlook the township part of Liberty that's north of us. And so that is something we need to work on, is making sure that we're highlighting Liberty Township as well as the Powell area. And yes, that's
including Hyatt's.
Yes, that's the little town of Hyatt's. And in fact, that Carpenter family settled in Liberty Township, not in Powell. They were north of here.
Is there anything you would like to add, Sherry? What else you would like to talk about to tell us
Gee,
about the history?
I've probably told you more already than you
No, I
needed to know or wanted to know. I will just simply say that I always, when I speak to groups, I teasingly say when I tell them that I'm a sixth generation of my family to live here, that either we're not very motivated to do something else or go somewhere else, or we've stayed because we love it. And I can tell you that I love it. And that is why I am still here.
You did a great job.